Thank you to Dollar Shave Club for sponsoring this video. Just go to dollarshaveclub.com/brainfood to get your starter set for just $5. Generally speaking these days, men tend to sport closely cropped haircuts. Very closely cropped in my case. If you happen to be one of those that enjoys having a neatly trimmed, easy to maintain do, as with everything great in this world, you have an Englishman to thank for that, as well as, in this case, a bet with friends. While the likes of Queen Elizabeth I and Mary I of Scotland had previously helped popularise wig wearing among women around this period, if you've ever seen a period drama, an episode of Blackadder, or just happened to be a fan of the absolutely dreamy Governor Weatherby Swan from the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, you're likely aware that men used to sport flowing wigs of the powdered variety. This particular fashion trend has its seeds in a disease that particularly reared its patchy head during the 16th century. At this time and beyond, Europe was suffering from a major syphilis epidemic, possibly a disease brought back from the New World, with one potential side effect being that some sufferers experienced patchy hair loss. Wearing a wig, while not considered as good as the real thing at this point, was generally thought to be a superior alternative to going out in public in this balding state. After all, nobody likes a bald man. It's pretty repulsive. Some of the earliest wigs favoured by Western men were often large and ornate, with King Louis XIII being one of the first prominent men since the days of the ancient Romans to wear a wig as a fashion accessory. This helped set the trends when he took to wearing wigs in the 1620s. Incidentally, his son, King Louis XIV, was the dude who popularised high heel wearing among humans long before women wore them. More on this in the bonus facts section in just a little bit, so stay tuned. In any event, rather than a bout with syphilis, King Louis XIII is thought to simply have been the genetic recipient of male pattern baldness, aka the disease of the lesser man. Whoever wrote this, why? Being kind and all, rather than being mocked for wearing a wig to cover this up, he was mimicked, and wigs not only became fashionably acceptable, they slowly became the social norm, even if you were already blessed with a glorious set of locks. A potential side benefit that may have helped the popularity of the wig along was also the fact that lice, a bit of a problem for some in this era and region, became less of an issue with wigs. By shaving off your own hair and wearing a wig that could be more thoroughly sanitized, separate from your head, this meant getting rid of lice was a little bit easier. A similar thought process saw women, particularly prostitutes of the 15th and 16th centuries in Western Europe, shaving their nether regions and then wearing wigs known as a merkin where their hair used to be. This allowed them to still keep some semblance of modesty and still avoid the lice problem. Over the years, men's wigs became more restrained in nature, moving from the large Buffon-esque headpieces typified by people like Charles II to more restrained powdered ponytails seen atop the head of everyone from the Founding Fathers to the Prime Minister of England. Curiously, although he's the president most associated with possessing luscious, perfectly tamed locks and curls with a tightly drawn ponytail, George Washington reportedly never wore a wig and, in fact, sported shoulder-length hair that was carefully and somewhat painfully styled each day, no doubt having to frequently tell the ladies, "Yes, it's real. And yes, it's spectacular." Although a bit of a fun fact here, while his hair may have been real, his teeth were not, though contrary to popular belief, he never seems to have worn wooden teeth, with their myth possibly being connected to the fact that the physician who made his false teeth at one point being called Dr. John Greenwood. Whatever the case, Washington's actual false teeth were carved from ivory and also contained quite a bit of gold and some lead. Humans... That was a good idea. Lead. Human and animal, horse and donkey teeth were then riveted to the gold and ivory, and the whole thing was set in place by a spring mechanism. This spring mechanism actually made it so that Washington had to constantly, very forcibly, hold his mouth shut with his jaw muscles, which is why he probably always looked extra stern in portraits. In early models of his dentures, the false teeth would be hooked to his remaining real teeth with metal wires. Eventually, he lost all of his teeth, and the dentures relied completely on the spring mechanism to stay in place. And at this point, I'll just comment that, oh my god, I'm glad I don't live in the past. As to how he lost his teeth, Washington actually had pretty meticulous dental hygiene for his time, including brushing his teeth and using mouthwash and a tongue scraper. However, he also suffered from constant toothaches and frequently took calomel, mercurius chloride, which can lead to the destruction of the teeth. He also, like many of his day, used substances that were very abrasive to clean his mouth, which probably also led to the decay of his tooth enamel. So, by a combination of that and probably having naturally bad teeth, this led him to losing his teeth steadily from the age of 22 until 55, when he officially had lost them all. Indeed, by his inauguration in 1789, he had only one natural tooth remaining, which I like to imagine that he called Old Chomper. Going back to hair, although there were some exceptions, the majority of wigs worn by men were powdered to make them as ghostly white as possible. For poorer men, this powder often consisted of flour, but richer men liked to use starch powder infused with lavender and other pleasant-smelling things to make them more pleasing to the nostrils. It's noted that some men would cleverly powder their natural hair to give the illusion that they were wearing a wig to avoid the costly and time-consuming process of actually having one custom-made. That's got to be the only example of history where people made their natural hair look like a wig on purpose. The best and most ornate wigs could cost as much as a year's wages for a common Londoner, though typical everyday wigs tended to run about a week's wages on the same scale. So this brings us to the world's most influential haircut. The use of hair powder, in England anyway, was so ubiquitous that in 1795, then Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger ushered in a tax on the product in an attempt to raise money for the country, which, as was often the case back then, was warring with the scourge of humanity, the French. The tax required any man wishing to purchase hair powder to pay a guinea, about equal to £70 or $100 today, for a certificate that would grant them the right to buy hair powder for a year. As so often happens when new taxes are introduced, people were not happy about it. One person in particular who was annoyed by the tax was the then Duke of Bedford, Francis Russell, who refused to pay it on principle. In protest, the Duke had his hair cut short and scandalously wore it unpowdered and unstyled in court. The Duke, knowing just how unpopular the tax was, also encouraged his friends to adopt a similar natural hairstyle in political protest, which they all did, agreeing to, as reported by the London Chronicle, forfeit a sum of money if any of them wore their hair tied or powdered within a certain period. The hairstyle was dubbed the Bedford Level by the Duke's peers as a nod to a large area of marshy lands in the fens his family had drained or levelled recently, known, funnily enough, as the Bedford Level. The name was also a playful allusion to the Duke's somewhat controversial and reformist political views. The style quickly became popular throughout the Duke's not unimpressive circle of influence, and even became something of a symbol of protesting new taxes, even among the common man. As a result of all of this, the style slowly disseminated throughout the country. Over time, and as short, closely cropped hair became the norm, men began to experiment with different styles, mostly modeled after classical images from Greek and Roman art. In particular, men took inspiration from the two Roman emperors, Caesar and Titus, as well as Brutus, all of whom are classically portrayed as sporting shorter hairstyles of varying styles. By the time the government stopped the powder tax in 1869, powdered wigs were almost unheard of, with less than 1,000 people still paying the tax when it was finally repealed. At this point, the shorter, more economical style introduced by Bedford was firmly ingrained in modern English men, something that hasn't really changed too much in the time since. And speaking of emancipation from the real scourge of humanity, that would be hair, and that's where I'm going to mention today's sponsor, Dollar Shave Club. How's that for a transition? Dollar Shave Club covers all of your grooming needs: shower, oral care, deodorants, and of course, most importantly, shaving. Did you know they did all those other things as well? Now, obviously, you're looking at me and you're thinking, Simon, you've got a massive beard. Not a massive, you've got a reasonably sized beard. You clearly don't shave. Au contraire, I shave my head. Not so I can fit a glorious powdered wig, I just shave it, so I don't look bald all the time. I mean, you know, where you've got the strip of hair around the side. Dollar Shave Club sent me their ultimate shave starter set. Let me lay it all out here. What have you got going on? First of all, prep scrub. Hit that up. Get that on your face. Next up, shave butter. Slap that all over your face. Shave, or in my case, just imagine I'm saying head. Shave, boom. Afterwards, post-shave dew. Now, my hair tends to get a little bit dry after a shave. This stuff, I whack it on, and it's great. keeps it nice and moisturized, super hydrated. So visit dollarshaveclub.com/brainfood. You'll get this ultimate shave starter set for only $5. But why not round it out and get some of their other high-quality products? After that, the restock box ships full-sized products at a regular price. And let's get into the bonus fact. Speaking of looking fabulous, high heels, which it turns out were all the rage among men long before women. The first high heel wearers are believed to have been Persian horseback warriors sometime around the 9th century. The extended heel was reportedly developed specifically for riding to keep the rider's foot from slipping out of the stirrups. It also helped to steady the rider when standing up in the stirrups and shooting arrows. A group of Persian diplomats visited Europe in 1599 to recruit allies to help Persia defeat the Ottoman Empire. A craze for Persian culture developed as a result, and Persian-style high-heeled shoes were adopted enthusiastically by Western European aristocrats. The shoes became a status symbol, and the heels were extended to make the men look even taller. This is thought by many etymologists to be where the term well-heeled, meaning wealthy, originally came from. Just as the 1980s had notorious shoe collector Imelda Marcos, the 1600s had rabid shoe collector and trendsetter Louis XIV of France, the dude we mentioned earlier. While he was a powerful leader, his height left something to be desired at 5 feet 4 inches tall, 1.62 meters, which was slightly below average for his day. A king being slightly shorter than average was not ideal for his ego, so Louis took measures to make himself look taller, sporting 4-inch heels, often decorated with elaborate battle scenes. Eventually, he switched to having red heels on all of his shoes and decreed that only the upper echelons of society could have matching red heels. It became a simple matter of looking at the color of a man's heels to see if he was in the king's inner circle. Not to be outdone, though, women of the 1600s started wearing heels as a way of showing their equality. Elizabeth Semmelhack, curator of the Battier Shoe Museum in Toronto and author of Heights of Fashion, A History of the Elevated Shoe, says the rage of that period in parts of Europe was for women to dress and act like a man. It should be noted, though, that at the time, men's outfits by today's standards were extremely effeminate. A la King Louis XIV's many portraits you can find of him with long hair, tights, high heels, intricately patterned dresses, etc. Semmelhack states, "You had women cutting their hair, adding epaulets to their outfits. They would smoke pipes. They would wear hats that were very masculine. And this is why women adopted the heel. It was in an effort to masculinize their outfits." As usually happens, high fashion is adapted into more affordable versions and filters down to lesser humans, and the lower classes started to wear high heels. The elite responded by making their heels increasingly higher to maintain the distinction of being better than everyone else. The higher the heel, the more expensive the shoe typically was, so obviously you're a better person because of that. They also began to differentiate heels into two kinds, fat heels for men and skinny heels for women. Eventually, men got away from the heel almost completely to show their distinction from women. Since the late 18th century, men's shoes have had primarily low heels except for cowboy boots and some shoes worn by rock stars who occasionally have a propensity to wear effeminate garb similar to before the Great Male Renunciation, when men switched from wearing jewelry and elaborate outfits with highly decorated cloth to drab, darker-colored, simple clothing. Basically, when Western men on the whole stopped trying to beautify themselves, starting at the tail end of the 18th century. For a time, women also drifted away from the heel, as it truly wasn't practical, particularly on old muddy or cobblestone-style streets where heels were nearly impossible to walk in. They weren't gone long, though. The heel came back into fashion in the mid-19th century with the advent of photography. Why? As seems to happen often when new technologies are introduced, pornographers are always among the first to take advantage, and they were among the first to embrace photography. This pertains to high heels in that they often dressed models for risque postcards and other photographs in nothing but a modern, for that time, version of the high heel. Since then, high heels have come in and out of fashion repeatedly, except for seemingly every facet of the adult entertainment industry, where they're seemingly a constant, as well as with cowboys who, while they still occasionally wear them for practical purposes while riding a horse, anyone who's grown up around such horse riding individuals knows the vast majority of the time they actually wear their high heels as a fashion statement. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Do not forget to check out our fantastic sponsor for this episode, Dollar Shave Club. It's just $5. What? Link below, and thank you for watching.